songs. And Matthew, you need to step up your beard game because Steve has his pink goatee. Bruce has that amazing beard. I don't know what we got to get going on over here, but I was pretty impressed with the beards this morning. All right, so before we get into our lesson, I want to remind everybody of a few announcements that are definitely important. First off, Trunk or Treat is this Friday. Yeah, it seems like Halloween came up really quick. I don't know where October went. But this Friday is Trunk or Treat here in the parking lot from 6 to 8 p.m. 6 to 8 is when the guests will be here. So we need to be set up and ready to go by like 5:30 and that kind of thing, so that way we can be all ready. If you're planning on decorating a car, just show up. We'll be over here on this side of the parking lot where we always are, and we'll have everything designated over there. But bring your car, bring your decoration, bring your costumes. We'll provide the candy. But with that being said, we could use more candy. There's a bin in the foyer that we need to keep filling with candy. If you don't want to buy the candy yourself, give the money to Zinni, and she'll go buy the candy for you. We like to go on Halloween at Winco because it's like half price then, and we can get a lot of it pretty quick. But so this Friday is Trunk or Treat, so be there for that. Even if you don't want to dress up, your presence there will definitely be an encouragement. Just wandering around, having a good time, talking to people. It's a lot of fun. Winter Camp registration is also open. Winter Camp is up at Yosemite Bible Camp, December 27th through the 30th. We opened registration up on a different platform this time around, and I'm excited about that. From my standpoint, it looks like it's going to go a lot smoother. So register online for Winter Camp. If you want to donate for people to go see the office staff, and we'll make sure the donation goes to a right spot. In general, too, if you want to donate toward camp at all, they had a wall fall down like recently. If you didn't know, the mountain behind the cafeteria has slowly been coming toward the camp. Well, that cinder block wall went down, and we got to move a mountain back, and that cost a lot of money, like tens of thousands of dollars. So if you have tens of thousands of dollars lying around and you want to donate to build a wall at Bible Camp, we could use your help. But in the meantime, we could talk more about it at Big Group tonight. Tonight at 5 o'clock here at the church building in room 3, we're going to be having a potluck dinner, so bring food to share, and we'll have our devotional time where we're going to be discussing the lesson from this morning. So no small groups are meeting. So those of you that already come to the church building on Sunday night, it's easy. You just keep coming. For those of you that go to Corcoran or to like my house or Soul Bowl or something like that, we're all going to meet together at 5 o'clock. And if you've never been to Big Group before, it's a good chance to come together and hang out with your church family and spend some time in Bible study. So that is tonight at 5. But this morning, we are beginning our new sermon series in the parables of Jesus. And we're going to be going through these for the next several weeks. Jesus spoke in a lot of parables. Bruce read one this morning, the entire parable in just 3 verses. We're going to be looking at kind of a longer one here. Each week, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce what parables are all about, why Jesus spoke them, and we'll dig into it as we go with the goal of better understanding what Jesus taught and why he taught it and why he taught in this way. But as we begin, I think the question we often have to define and remind people of is, what is a parable? We often talk about, okay, we got similes and metaphors and parables, and well, what's a simile? Well, it's comparing using like or as. Well, metaphor is bigger than that. What's a parable? It's an extended metaphor. I mean, it gets kind of complicated when you start looking at this from a grammar or a literary standpoint. But the best definition I've ever heard of a parable is kind of an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. It's an illustration from things that they would understand that teach a spiritual lesson. These parables had lots of different reasons why they were designed this way. Parables are designed to promote discussion. Parables are designed to invite comparison, where you compare and contrast the things in that illustration. And parables require contemplation because they're not always easily understood. And when you're new to the Bible, you're like, why did Jesus talk this way? Why parables? Because wouldn't it be better to just tell us exactly what you mean? But the thing is, parables cause us to discuss. Parables cause us to think. And parables make sure you're seeking the truth. In Matthew chapter 10, in verse 13 through 17, and I'm going to read this here, and you don't have to turn there yet. We're actually going to be in Luke today. But in Matthew 10, Jesus actually tells us why he speaks in parables. Matthew chapter 10, starting in verse 13, it says, now that's an incorrect verse right there. It's not verse 13 of Matthew chapter 10. We'll skip that. But here Jesus gets to a point it's Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11, verse 13, we go on. He says, For they all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you are willing to accept it, John himself is Elijah who is to come. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. So what Matthew does is he talks about that there's a lot of prophecies that are out there. There's a lot of teachings that are out there, but all of those teachings are designed to connect with individuals who are willing to hear it. And many times Jesus' disciples would ask, why do you speak in parables in this way? And he said, to you it's been given to hear these words, to them it's not. And basically, if I were to summarize up what Jesus says about why he speaks in parables, is he wants the people who are willing to listen to understand. But those who are not willing to actually listen aren't going to get it. They're just going to dismiss it. He wants you to dig in. He wants you to think. He wants you to actually be a truth seeker. And sometimes if you just tell people exactly what the point you're getting to, they'll just reject you. They'll tell you, I don't want that. But Jesus says, no, I'm going to speak in this way so those that are actually seeking the truth, those that are actually knocking on the door, those that are always asking, those are the ones that are going to get the answer. You'll see what I mean by this as we go into the text today. Because today, we're going to look at probably the most famous parable there is. If I were to say, what are the two most famous parables? You'd probably say the parable of the sower and the parable of the prodigal son. Today, we're going to look at the prodigal son, which is one that I know you're familiar with, but I'm going to retitle it this morning. And I'm going to try to do this with all of these parables. I'm going to try to look at them from the angle maybe a little bit different than we've always looked at them. Maybe point out something that you haven't noticed before. Maybe pull out an application that you haven't made. We usually refer to this parable as the parable of the prodigal son, or the wayward son, or the son that went away, that kind of idea. I do not believe, though, that this parable is designed to teach us about the prodigal son. I believe this parable is designed to draw our attention to the bitter brother. So I'm going to refer to this parable as the parable of the bitter brother this morning. So let's look at it together. Luke chapter 15, and I'm going to start all the way back in verse 1. Now you're like, well, I thought the parable starts later. It does. But let's look at what happens here. Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 1, we have Jesus in his earthly ministry. He's preaching, he's teaching, and in verse 1, it says, now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near him to listen to him. If you're new to the Bible, those two categories are people that the Jewish religious leaders didn't like. Tax collectors, sinners. Those are the people they wouldn't associate with. But here Jesus is associating with tax collectors and sinners, but they're accusing him. The Pharisees and scribes are murmuring. They're talking under their breath. They're gossiping about Jesus. And they say, this Jesus, he receives sinners and he eats with them. Now, we're like, well, isn't that good? I mean, Jesus is being a nice guy. He's talking to people. He's sharing the message of salvation. And how's he going to teach them if he's not with them? We understand that. But they're looking at it from the standpoint of a real rabbi, a real holy person would never be around these people. It'd be like kind of the stuffy old church person saying, well, I never. That kind of idea. That's what they're doing here. They're murmuring. They're talking about him, and they don't like what he's doing. And what Jesus does then is from that murmuring, verse 3, he tells them a parable. He actually tells them three parables here in this passage. He talks about a lost sheep, he talks about a lost coin, and then he talks about what we're going to be looking at, the lost son. But all three of these parables go back to this accusation right here. They're saying he's eating with sinners, and Jesus goes, let me tell you something. I'm going to give you a parable. But not just one parable. He gives them three parables, and it ends with the conclusion of the parable that we today are calling the parable of the bitter brother. So now let's look at that parable in detail and see where we're going with this. So Luke chapter 15, starting there in verse 11. He said, a man had two sons. So here you have a man, he has two sons. Not a real man. It's a make-believe character in a story designed to teach us something. Okay? A man had two sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me a share of the estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country. And there he squandered his estate with loose living. This is the part of the story we pretty much all know. This younger son says, Dad, give me my inheritance early. He got his inheritance. He goes off into a faraway land and parties it all away. Okay? He's living a sinful life. Doesn't go into detail what he's doing. I think it's kind of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of thing. He's going out there, and that's what he does. So he takes his inheritance, and he blows it. Then the story or the parable continues. Verse 14. Now when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. We're not too familiar with famines in our current situation, but if a famine grips a community, it can mean starvation. And here you have this man in this bad situation. He's broke, he's hungry, he's estranged from his family, and we find out that now he gets a job, verse 15, feeding pigs. So he went away and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and they sent him into his fields to feed swine. And a Jewish person doesn't want to be around those pigs. That's there for a reason in this parable to show us how low he has gotten. Blows all his money in the field with the pigs, famine across the land, and he's so hungry that he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one gave anything to him. He's so hungry that the garbage, the slop, that's what we call pig feed, right? Slop, that's what he's saying. That even looks edible. And no one gave him anything. And that's where sinful living will take you, by the way. We'll talk about it more in our small group or a big group tonight, but it took him to this place. No one's there to help him. He's there broken down, but he realizes his situation. Verse 17, and when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying here with hunger? He goes, it's better in my dad's house. He says, I will get up and I will go to my father and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. So the son decides, I'm going to go back to my father's house. Definitely cool lessons there. We'll talk more about those another time. Lessons about coming back to the Father. Lessons about realizing your sin. Lessons about repenting. Lessons about a wake-up call. Lessons about where sin will take you. But here he chooses to go back to the Father. That's hard to do when you've blown your inheritance, when you've estranged yourself from the family, when you probably were a little bit cocky when you wandered off. Now he's wandering back. He goes back to the Father. And in verse 20, he plans on telling the father, just make me a slave. Verse 20. So he got up and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him. And he ran and embraced him and kissed him. The father was worried about the son. He sees the son afar off and he's running to meet him, to hug him, to kiss him. I mean, my son's only moved out of the house for 2 weeks now. I kept looking out the window yesterday waiting for Owen to show up. I couldn't imagine this situation here, right? His son's far off. He's living a sinful life. He's worried. There's no text messaging. There's no Instagram. He doesn't know what's going on. He thought his son was lost. And the son is there, and the father runs to meet him. And he embraced him, and he kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. So the son, apologizes and everything. The father welcomes him, and he celebrates. The father said to his slaves, quickly, bring out the best robe and put a ring on his feet and sandals on his feet and bring out the fatted calf. Kill it and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine that was dead has come to his life again. He was lost and has been found. And they began to celebrate. That's a lot of times where we leave off. But that's not the point of this parable. There were two sons. One son was lost. One son lived a life of sin. And that son was found. And there was much celebration. By the way, if you want to read backwards, also with the lost sheep they celebrated. Also with the lost coin they celebrated. When someone is lost and found, you celebrate. You're excited about it. You ever lost your wallet and then find it? You're like, yes, right? Imagine your son here. So he found his son. But what about the older brother? The older brother stayed at home. The older brother didn't blow his inheritance. The older brother was doing everything right. What about him? Verse 25. Now the older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. So he's out in the field. He comes home. There's a party going on. He's like, hey, what's going on here? And the servant tells him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he received him back safe and sound. So he's like, your brother's back. We're having a party. But the older brother, he's not celebrating. The older brother became angry, verse 28, and he was not willing to go in. And his father came out. So the older brother's like, I'm not going in there. My younger brother's a loser. He blew his inheritance. He upset my parents. He's been doing everything wrong. He's been working with pigs probably. They're in a foreign land doing who knows what. He's like, I'm not going to celebrate. He doesn't deserve this. He hasn't been faithful like I have been. He hasn't always done the right thing. He stayed outside, so the father comes out and pleads with him, come in, like, what are you doing? And he answered and said to him, so this is what he tells his father. This is what the older son has the nerve to tell the father in this situation. Look, for many years I've been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours. And yet you have never given me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends, which, is that actually true 100% true? He's never once violated a command. He never once did anything wrong. He's always been perfect. Probably not, but that's how he sees himself. He could do no wrong. Where's my party? Where's my cow? Where's my robe? Where's my celebration? He says, but when this son of yours, not my brother, not our family member, not our loved one, but when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him? He's like, what are you doing? Now the father tells him, son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live, and was lost and has been found. You see, the older son's angry. He doesn't want anything to do with this. And the parable ends with that older son being bitter. Now, we talked about that parables are designed to teach us something. And it's designed for those that will actually hear the message to hear it. In context here, who is supposed to be hearing this message? It was the people who, back in chapter 15, verse 1, who were scoffing at Jesus and saying, this man eats with sinners. Why was Jesus eating with sinners? Because the sinners are lost. And the sinners need to be saved. They need someone to care about them and be there for them. And the Pharisees and the scribes were like, why is he paying attention to them? Shouldn't he pay attention to us? We're the holy ones. We go to church. We read our Bibles. We tithe. We give. We do this. We do that. Pay attention to us. And Jesus gives 3 parables in a row. Lost sheep, lost coin, lost kid, that show that you need to be celebrating the lost people being saved. But the Pharisees and the scribes are like the older brother in this story. That's the goal of this parable, is to get those guys, if they were willing to hear, let them hear this. You are that bitter older brother. But we're the Israelites. We've always been following God. Why isn't Jesus paying attention to us? Because there's lost people in need of salvation. See, they're not even that upset that Jesus is with sinners. They're upset that Jesus doesn't value them as much as they value themselves. See, all along the way, I think all that they wanted was Jesus to pat them on the back and say, hey, you guys are great. I'm so proud of you. Hey, everybody, pay attention to the Pharisees. They can do no wrong. But they never got their party. And since they didn't get their party, what they tried to do? Discredit Jesus and ultimately try to destroy Jesus. They are the bitter older brother in this story. But again, this parable we're studying too. Now, we're not Pharisees and scribes. We sometimes act like it. But what is this parable speaking to us, though? What is maybe an application that we can make? In this story, what brother are we? Now, in an audience like this, I know there's a couple different possibilities. You might be the younger brother right now. You might be living in sin and you're ready to come back to the Lord. I hope you are. I hope you're ready to come back. Don't live in sin any longer. Don't waste your life. Don't live in a way that you shouldn't. The younger brother did sin, absolutely, and he needed to come back to the Father. You might be the younger brother this morning. What application do you need to make? Is it time for you to come back to God, to get rid of that sin, to cast it off and say, I am going to come back to my Lord? Maybe you're that brother. Or maybe, because I know I'm speaking to a crowd of people that are Christians, maybe sometimes we're the bitter and stubborn older brother. We're unwilling to care about others. We get so upset with all these other people getting attention and not us that we get a little bit bitter about it. And maybe sometimes we're a little bit of both of these brothers. We sin like the younger brother and we're bitter like the older. I'm sad to admit that I think I'm a little bit sometimes. But notice, the Father here says we had to celebrate. He had to and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. But where's our party? See, that's what the older brother is asking through all of this. But where's my attention? I fear that sometimes as Christians, those who especially have been Christians for a long time, we want our celebration. We're thinking not about those that are lost, but we're thinking about what's in it for me. What about me? I've been a Christian my whole life, and they're going to get attention? God's going to forgive them at the last minute in their life? I've been a Christian my whole life. You ever thought that way? Ever been a little bit, and I'm not saying you would ever say it out loud. Oh, no, we're too righteous for that. We wouldn't say it out loud. But have you ever done the math in your head? Like, hold up here. I've gone to this many church services. I had to suffer through that many Eclipse sermons, and that guy just started becoming a Christian now. You know, we're waiting for our party. We're always thinking, what's in it for me? You know, when I was a kid, I got warned by parents and by teachers and probably by most people in my life, this right here. You don't always have to be, Cliff, the center of attention. Could you imagine I would have that trouble, right? You know, you don't always have to be the center of attention, because I had a tendency to always try to be the center of attention. But sadly, a lot of us, even as adults, we're like that. We want everything to revolve around us. What's in it for me? And I think what happens is when we see other people get blessed, deep down inside in this tiny evil part of our soul, we get bitter about it. We see them getting blessed, we go, oh, where's my blessing? Or maybe let's flip it around. You see something bad happen to someone else that maybe has a life that you admire, and then you step back and go, you are glad a little bit that they got brought down a notch, you tell yourself. Well, I'm glad they got that. They need a wake-up call a little bit. When you find yourself acting that way, that's bitter older brother coming out. You know, maybe it's a celebrity scandal of some kind. You find some glee in that. Maybe it's a religious figure who's influential, has some kind of sin that comes out. And deep down inside, a part that you would never admit out loud, you're a little bit glad. Because sometimes we think it's like this, well, if they get a blessing, I don't have a blessing. And if they get a curse, then I will get a blessing. But another receiving a blessing does not lessen yours. That older son was blessed. The older son had a relationship with the father. He was in the father's house. Why is he can't celebrate for the younger brother? Because he's bitter. Just because someone else receives salvation doesn't mean you're not. Just because someone else is being blessed doesn't mean you can't be blessed. It's not a matter of doing the math. It's not a matter of balancing the schedules. Let God love the way God loves, and you just be thankful that people are being blessed. Because if not, we might find ourselves not being the younger son, but being the bitter older brother. And by the way, in this parable, which one's saved? The one who came back to the Father. The parable ends with the bitter older one still bitter. And what we find out in the text is the Pharisees and scribes, they stayed bitter and they weren't saved. But many tax collectors, sinners, Gentiles, you know, people, the poor, the ill, the demon-possessed, all those people, those are the ones that came and were saved. And the ones that should have realized how good they had it were bitter. Let's not get that bitter older brother syndrome. The lesson is yours this morning. I hope this parable has spurred some thoughts in your mind. I hope it's going to cause some discussion tonight in our big group gathering, so be here for that. but let's make sure that we are the brother that comes back. In all these things, let's not be bitter. Let's not go off into sin. Let's stay with the Father. Let's celebrate with the Father. And let's go out there and find the other people that are lost, bring them to God so that together we can celebrate and be glad that others get to receive the blessings that we do. The lesson's yours. We're going to sing a song here in just a moment. If you need to come back to Jesus, we're here to help you. If you've been living a life of bitterness, we'll pray for you. If you need to learn more about Jesus, if you need to be baptized into him, we can help you. Why don't you come as together we sing? And as we